follows: to ask His Majesty's government what assessment they've made of the current hostilities between Israel and Iran, and in doing so, I draw attention to my entries on the register.
My Lord, since I spoke to the House on Monday, the situation in the Middle East has escalated further, and we continue to work closely with our allies to press for restraint and diplomacy. The Foreign Secretary is in Washington today for discussions with the United States. We urge all British nationals to monitor travel advice and to register their presence if they are in Israel or the occupied Palestinian territories.
In thanking the Noble Lord for the update, what is very clear in the last 48 hours, the situation, to use the word escalation, would be an understatement. We are now facing a very, very great challenge in the region, which will have impacts not just to two countries involved, Israel and Iran. We're also talking about the wider region and indeed the economic impact of conflict in that region to the global economy. Would the Noble Lord the Minister assure me, firstly, that this House and indeed the other place will be fully informed of whatever action the government, His Majesty's government, seeks to take? I would also draw attention that there are many on the Noble Lord's benches across your Lordship's House, on the crossbenches and indeed on our benches, who have insight and experience of previous crises, and that consultation is extremely valuable. That when the government speaks, it speaks not just as a Labour government, but the government of our country and for our nation. And the citizens of our country who are currently in the region will be fully protected, and indeed extra measures will be taken to ensure their safe passage away from that particular region. And the final element, which the Noble Lord knows that I will focus in on, he talked of the measures being taken on diplomacy. The last day or so, what we've heard from across the pond is not that the diplomatic track, but a very different track is being pursued. Can the Noble Lord Minister assure me that whatever action is pursued, that we will be fully informed, but as he said in his opening response, that the diplomatic track, particularly working with key partners, I mentioned Qatar, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Oman, will be fully kept active?
Well, my Lords, I can only agree with the Noble Lord with most of his remarks, and I think it's incumbent on all governments to keep Parliament fully informed of what is becoming an extremely volatile and dangerous situation. So we will obviously do that, and certainly I agree with him in terms of, in particular, the expertise across the House and how we embrace them and inform them. I'm very keen to do that. But can I just say that, you know, no one is going to exhaust that diplomatic effort. We are absolutely focused on doing that, no matter what we read and speculate in the press, which is why the Foreign Secretary is in Washington today. But I would also say the Prime Minister spoke to the Emir of Qatar last night. The Foreign Secretary spoke to the Israeli Foreign Minister Saar and the Iranian Foreign Minister, the Saudi Foreign Minister, Prince Faisal, and he had calls, obviously regular calls, but particularly yesterday with US Secretary of State Rubio and EU High Representative Callas and counterparts from France and Germany. But I would also say, in addition to that close working with the UAE, Qatar, Oman and Jordan, and Turkey, Iraq and Pakistan, we are also ensuring that all our ambassadors in the region are fully engaged and in regular contact with their host countries. And we remain in close contact with those embassies. So let me reassure you, the Noble Lord, that we are absolutely focused on that diplomatic track. We are not going to exhaust it. We are focused on de-escalation and ensuring the security of all our citizens, but also the citizens of the world.
Ahmad's final point, the danger that the Minister referred to is exacerbated because of the unpredictability of our most significant ally in the United States. I'm glad the Foreign Secretary is in Washington, but can the Minister assure these benches that because the UK is so integrated with the United States, both diplomatically and through the operations, potentially through US Central Command, the UK has not only a capability but an intent not to be dragged into a potential protracted and very dangerous wider conflict if the United States do seek to be part of this. We can make sure that we have a distinct position from the United States so that we are still focusing on de-escalating for the entire region, even if our key ally is part of escalation. And secondly, I'm sure the Minister will be aware of this, but many of our diplomatic friends within the region, especially within Jordan and elsewhere, are determined that we do not lose sight of what is happening within Gaza and the West Bank at the moment, with what has turned out to be queues for food turning into arbitrary killing fields. And we should ensure that what is happening in an incredibly complex situation between Israel and Iran, we are acting to save lives within Gaza for those very people who are simply seeking food and medicine.
Yeah.
Well, as the Noble Lord knows, I agree with him in terms that despite the urgency of the situation in relation to Iran, we are not taking our eyes off the situation in Gaza. We are absolutely focused on ensuring that we can get the humanitarian aid in as we have promised to do, and we're working very hard with all our allies, but in particular making the case very strongly that the restrictions Israel government has put on should be very much lifted. Can I also say, I'm not going to speculate what the next steps of the US President may be or not, but the simple fact is that he has made clear, as I said on Monday, a military solution cannot resolve Iran's nuclear escalation for the long term. So we do need a process in place, and we're absolutely focused on doing that. And of course, we remain, as the Foreign Secretary is in Washington, in close contact with the United States, and His Majesty's government will not give a running commentary on what those conversations or speculate on their sovereign decision, which is a matter for the US government. But can I reassure the House, we are absolutely focused on using all diplomatic means available to urge restraint, even at this stage, and de-escalate the situation. And the UK teams throughout the world, as I mentioned in my first response to the Noble Lord, are absolutely focused on that. So I can reassure him about that.
My lords, does my noble friend agree with me that where possible, whether in this dangerous situation or any other, where possible without compromising secrecy or urgency, the House of Commons in particular should be consulted before any deployment of UK forces? If he does agree with that proposition, and what was an embryonic convention, I think, under the Cameron government, does His Majesty's government have any plans to enshrine that convention in statute?
Well, let's not speculate. What I would repeat, the reassurance that I gave to the Noble Lord, we are absolutely committed in keeping Parliament informed of this very, very difficult and delicate situation. I think it's important that we all focus on ensuring that we should speak with one voice, that we want de-escalation and peace, and we'll be absolutely focused on that. And I'm not going to speculate on what those next steps may be, but I am absolutely convinced when the Prime Minister spoke at the G7, when the Foreign Secretary on his way in Washington today, we are absolutely clear that the situation requires de-escalation, and we will not move from that position.
My Lords, one of the crossbench. Many difficulties associated with this situation is the confusion that seems to have arisen over strategic objectives. Clearly, Israel has stated it does not want Iran to possess a nuclear weapon, but there has been a lot of loose talk recently about regime change. Yeah. Could the Noble Lord, the Minister, confirm the UK government's view is that no matter how one might wish for regime change in Iran, this is absolutely not the way to do it? And that the decapitation of the regime by cutting off, by assassinating the religious head of it, will achieve little, since the structural underpinning of the regime, and in many ways the control of the regime, is in the hands of the IRGC. Can the Noble Lord, the Minister, assure the House that in all of our international negotiations with partners and others, we'll be stressing these points very strongly?
Well, I fully understand the comments of the Noble Lord, and I was listening to the Today programme this morning, where I thought there was, pretty unhelpful speculation about motives and intent. I mean, the simple fact is the reality in the world when we look. I mean, people mentioned Syria. There was an internal pressure in Syria. That regime fell because of that internal pressure. But history tells us when there's an external pressure on a regime, actually the consequences are the complete opposite. And some of those opposition people who were on the radio this morning were reflecting some of that, who saw that, in a different light than perhaps we see from the newspapers. But I just want to reassure the Noble Lord that the reality is we remain absolutely concerned about the nuclear potential of Iran. We want to see that limited and stopped completely. We want to see mechanisms to achieve that. And I think I know I repeated this many times on Monday. President Trump knows that too. He wants a deal, and that's what we've got to focus on and use all diplomatic means to do that.
My Lord,
British assets and British personnel in the region from hostile action. Will the Noble Lord, the Minister, confirm the government regards that right as inviolable?
Well, I think the Prime Minister has made clear we have actually sent flights to the region to ensure that our assets are fully protected and that we are fully prepared for any of the consequences. I hope that answers the Noble Lady's question. I may have missed it. I was concentrating on reading, but if she cares to repeat it, we do have plenty of time. Did I answer?
There was comment in the media earlier today about possible legal interpretation of when conflict is permissible, when joining that conflict is acceptable legally. I was merely concerned to understand that the fundamental right of a sovereign country to defend personnel and assets in a region from hostile action is an inviolable right, and the government understands that.
I think the government does fully understand that, which is why the Prime Minister has ensured that there are, that we are moving towards protecting those assets. The Noble Lady is absolutely right. But we are, before the Noble Lord Hannay, who's fortunately not in his place, before he asked me a question, of course, we are urging all parties to comply with international humanitarian law, and that is quite clear too.
Lords, can I ask what the government's thinking has been in terms of the day after? Because a lot of times we've observed in the last 18 months around the question of the day after in terms of the conflict in Gaza, and whether any thought has been given about the lessons learned from particularly Iraq about the day after, in terms of if the regime falls, what the government's thoughts are and plans are in terms of bringing stability to that region, given the oil that travels through the Straits of Hormuz will have a huge impact, not just in that region, but all across the world, and particularly ourselves here in the United Kingdom.
Well, I think I answered, I think that the question from the Noble and Lord Stirrup is actually I'm not going to speculate on, what consequences of these or the reasons for these. What our objective is to stop Iran having a nuclear capability, and we're absolutely working with all our allies to achieve that. The means to do that, as President Trump has made clear, is through a deal. There can't be a long-term military answer to that question. But can I just say, just to come back to the point that was made earlier, we shouldn't take our eyes off the situation in the occupied territories and Gaza. It is very sad that the consequences of these actions did result in the postponement of the two-state solution conference, which was going to bring the Saudi Arabias and others together to look at the situation the day after. What next? And I think we need to ensure that the international community is absolutely focused on that, and we will be supporting and putting all efforts into a reconvened conference to ensure that is the focus for the next steps.
My Lords, My Lords, those on these benches join others in calling for both Iran and Israel to draw back from war, especially the killing of civilians, and prioritise, as His Majesty's government has rightly said, restraint, diplomacy and dialogue. The Noble Lord, Lord Purvis, rightly raised the fact that the conflict with Iran threatens to overshadow and move the focus away from the conflict in Gaza, and I'm assured by the Minister's response to that. In both conflicts, though, civilians have and are being targeted. What actions are His Majesty's government taking to ensure that internationally accepted norms of armed conflict are being respected, as well as the norms of humanitarian law?
Well, let me reassure the Right Reverend Prelate that's exactly what we're urging on all parties, compliance with international humanitarian law, and we will continue to do so. And it is very sad that when missiles are fired off indiscriminately, then it is inevitable that civilians will suffer. That shouldn't be the case, and we are urging all parties to ensure that they do comply with that international humanitarian law.
Message from the Commons. They have passed the Policing and Crime Bill, to which they desire the agreement of your Lordships.
My Lords, Crime and Policing Bill. I beg to move that this bill be now read a first time.
The question is that this bill be now read a first time. As many as are of that opinion will say content. Content. The contrary not content. The contents have it. Questions on a statement made in the House of Commons yesterday on the reset of HS2.
My Lords, the history of the HS2 project is not a happy one. It was proposed in its current form initially by the Noble Lord, Lord Adonis, and endorsed by Gordon Brown in the wake of the global financial